very happy to join this platform where you bring together people from different areas, regions, and especially providing such an assistance to research scholars who are working on their research questions and developing problems and formulating and then preparing their thesis. I'm so happy to be a part of it, and thank you for inviting me and making me a part of this very meaningful endeavor. So now I know that this webinar is happening across a few days, and obviously you had a session on the the paradigm of the qualitative research yesterday. And I'm also, it is my humble, feeling that, any research, be it quantitative or qualitative, which, it should be perceived and, conceived within the paradigmatic, systems. And then only, it becomes a kind of a holistic perspective, So I'm sure that Dr. Kumaran yesterday would have given you the the paradigm basis of the quantitative and the qualitative research, and I may just make some reference to the paradigms in between, and I hope you will be able to connect with that. When we talk about the paradigms, actually the paradigms are the foundations from where the strategies and methodologies are evolved. And obviously, that is the context where we need to connect qualitative research with, the epistemological and ontological foundations, where you find that qualitative research falls under or comes under the, the interpretive and the subjective paradigmatic, basis. So we need to locate the qualitative problem formulation on that foundation, so that you don't go away from the inherent structures, inherent relationship that it has with the the approach and the method. So whenever I deal with sessions on qualitative research or quantitative research for that matter, I always advise my students to try to establish the link as properly as possible, so that you don't deviate from the from the route that you are expected. Many a times what happens is that people don't take it up so seriously, maybe to the extent that it requires to be attended to, and that is where most researchers, initial researchers especially, make a lot of mistakes in the context of formulating the problems, be it in quantitative or be it in qualitative frames. So my beginning point is obviously the line from where the qualitative research derives its logic, derives its framework, and that line is what just I mentioned as the the interpretive. That means you're not looking at any issue which is definitional in nature, which is not you are looking at things as if like it is a relative issue. It depends on the situation, person concerned, and it's not something that you can derive in a very very definite sense, as in the case of a quantitative research, where you talk about objectives, variables, and everything in a very very fixed kind of format. Whereas qualitative research actually demands that you don't consider this as very much a fixed procedure at the very beginning itself, because that possibility is not there, because you're dealing with certain reality or certain context of the problem, which is actually which demands that you have to see things from the eyes of the the person concerned, rather than from the the objectivist position that the quantitative research is actually focused on. So rather than instead of the objective position, we are dealing with an issue which demands to be taken as, or rather considered as, something which is subjective and relative in nature. So we need to have the basic understanding that qualitative problem formulation starts from practically an empty frame, an empty kind of a situation where you don't know many things. You are maybe you are venturing to explore something for the first time, or you are, dealing with a topic, which is purely subjective in character, which is internal to an individual, which you cannot, anticipate and assume in advance, and then, frame a problem, in a very definite sense. That is where, like the qualitative problem formulation involves a lot of flexibility in the sense that, often I know that, most of the students are well aware that, if you are asked to make a presentation of the qualitative problem formulation, an example, with an example and so on, it's very easy. People consider this as very easy because, the steps are very flexible. You don't have to say everything conclusively and, very specifically, because, you don't know the reality too much. To the extent that it requires you to frame it in a very, fixed terms. So the qualitative research is something which is focused on problems, which are subjective in character, which are interpretive in character, which demands, a kind of a context-specific kind of a, formulation. It's not something which is very generic in character. Like in the quantitative research where you deal with the general, situations. In qualitative research, you are, generally very context-specific, and you are looking at it from the point of view of the people, who are being studied. And also, we always do emphasize on the process dimension, rather than the, the processual nature. That's what we focus on. When we say for processual nature, something that is ongoing, something that is happening, or something that is evolving, something that is emerging. These are the kind of situations that you tackle with in qualitative research. So again, you are going to deal with something which demands that, okay, you need to be immersed in that, context of study. You need to be immersed, fully involved in that. And it is not the other way, in quantitative research, research demands that you need to be, say, objective and, looking at it from the outside, that kind of a perspective, So these are the, the factors which make qualitative research totally different from that of the quantitative, as it is often said. So now, therefore, we have to approach the issue as if it is a phenomenon that demands some kind of an exploration, an exploratory dimension, rather than the explanatory logic. When it is explanatory, as we all know, we are dealing with variables and their relationships, see how certain things are happening the way they happen, and, why it happens, and what are the factors that, results in, such a kind of a situation over there. So there are explanatory variables there, whereas in qualitative research, you generally deal with exploratory variables, exploratory dynamics and all that, So therefore, it has a lot of flexibility. And then again, it is not necessarily, a prefixed kind of an approach. It's not a prefixed approach, that I think we need to know. So while evolving, qualitative problem formulation, we must remember that, we should prefer, we should use a language, a vocabulary, which is different from that of the quantitative. Everyone knows the procedure of, say, formulation in terms of the various steps involved in, this, the qualitative, the research problem formulation. When you deal with the steps in problem formulation, you generally begin with the statement of the problem, then significance of the study, then a brief review of literature, all those steps, which objectives, specific, general and the specific, then the variables, hypotheses. These are the the general steps which you talk about in the context of quantitative problem formulation. But whereas when it comes to qualitative, like the vocabulary itself, I think needs some kind of a reorientation. Like you don't, generally talk in terms of the general objective and specific objective, because you don't know that much about the problem that you are studying to, frame it in the form of an objective, or frame it in the form of a specific objective. You don't know the details. You don't have that specificities, with you. So in the absence of all that, like you use such vocabulary and verbs, like in your statements, which are, generally reflective of the aspects like seeking to understand, exploring a process, describing an experience, reporting a story. These are some of the, the frames within which you can, move thinking around, organize your thinking, because this is the, the paradigmatic demand on the qualitative problem formulation, that, like you cannot put things in a definite verb kind of a format, because you don't know, much of the details about which you're going to study. You have only a kind of open questions, open questions, or maybe very, very abstract kind of, ideas with you, which is not good enough, which is not sufficient enough to, convert and evolve into a particular, specific research question. So you need to use these, use such vocabularies, which clarifies and which exposes that you are just, having the question in a very open sense with you. The question is very open in nature, and you are just about discovering something about this, not necessarily a final kind of a say a report which like fully comprised of with all the data and things like that. It may be just the beginning of an exploration, which would later perhaps lead you to a theoretical kind of an understanding. Maybe in the initial stage it may not happen, but still, most of the qualitative researchers begin from nowhere kind of a situation, and then move towards understandings which has certain emergent character. It's not prefixed in any way, so that is one aspect which I want to highlight at the beginning of this session itself. Like we need to use a language, a kind of an approach which is little different from that of the quantitative context of problem formulation. So this exploratory character has to be kept in mind, and or rather, the flexibility of the entire process has to be kept in mind. And otherwise, if you anticipate everything in advance, it violates the basic paradigmatic rules. That means, you are putting things into their mouth, kind of situation, which is not the logic of a qualitative research. You are actually searching for, exploring for, or rather, in the process of discovering something which is unknown to you, which is unknown to most of the people, and only the contextual, the specific kind of an approach can reveal something to you, and that demands an altogether different, consideration, approach, and orientation. That's what I'm basically referring to. So instead of objectives, we always consider that you put it up in the form of research questions. Research questions in the sense that open questions. Not again a very, very precise and concise question. It's an open question in the, to begin with, a general question, and then think of, whether there are any possibilities of, deriving some, specific questions to support the general question. That depends on, where, at what stage of research you are, and again, what type of topic that you are studying. So these issues will influence you in terms of framing the questions and so on. I have seen many researchers, making this mistake of, developing so many questions, in their, problem formulation stage. I generally discourage them and tell them that, okay, you don't have to anticipate all the questions, because you wouldn't know what exactly is the problem out there, and you will require some amount of exposure to the situation before you, derive your questions properly, So I have seen some researchers, ultimately ending with a very polished and very refined, at the end of their research, reaching out to a more relevant and more meaningful question. That sometimes happens as, an outcome of the entire research rather than, beginning with it. Generally, we have a feeling that all research begins with the question, begins with the objective, and so on, Whereas in qualitative research, the other way is also possible. Maybe ultimately, what you are going to derive could be a major question, a kind of a very, very, very strong and very, very systematic. Something which you can articulate very properly, at the end of your research rather than at the beginning of the research. So evolving proper questions could itself be an outcome of a qualitative research. We need to keep that in mind. It is not that all the questions are preset and it's already ready with you, and then you just launch your research and come out with a fantastic answer for that. But that is not the way. That's why I'm saying that qualitative problem formulation do have aspects of openness, flexibility. A kind of a little bit of abstractness is already will be there, because you are dealing with someone else's experience, which you don't know, because you don't have that experience, and their experience is their experience, and obviously capturing that, you cannot anticipate from outside as if what you need to really capture. It is out of the the context and out of the person concerned, like that you may get to have a picture of that. So these are things which I think any qualitative researcher should keep in mind. What happens normally is that like we don't distinguish these two. The realities, the nature of the reality is different. The ontological character of your problem is different. The epistemological strategies are different. The knowledge level nature of the knowledge itself is different. So nature of the reality is different. Nature of the knowledge is different. So therefore, the approach demands a kind of a revision, a kind of a reorientation, a reimagination. Kind of a requirement is there. So one need to keep this aspect in mind before formulating the problem. Now, when you move to the different steps in qualitative problem formulation, as I was mentioning, first one is statement of the problem. Statement of the problem of a quantitative research and the qualitative research is not going to be the same. It cannot be the similar. Because, as everyone knows, qualitative researches are generally, carried out upon topics which are underexplored, whereas quantitative research begins from a theory. We know that it is deductive in character. So obviously there could be so much of existing literature, so much of theorized literature on your topic in a quantitative research, whereas that need not be the case with regard to the qualitative research. You may not have any literature at all sometimes, and you may not have any at least there may not be much theories available. Theorized understanding of the problem at hand may not be available. So obviously you will be more like searching for something which is non-existing, non-existent. So that is the kind of situation where literature review takes place as far as qualitative research is concerned. So you may be having the a kind of an understanding which is very, very general in character. So it is widespread kind of a reality that you're dealing with. Like you don't get definite interpretations and definite totally relevant kind of literature, as far as qualitative researchers are concerned. So we need to keep it open. Instead of, framing it in the, final sense, like you may have some kind of related reference here and there, and then that is what you may cover in the, qualitative reviews. And otherwise, if you say that, when people say that my approach is qualitative, but my, statement of the problem is so elaborate. Not statement of the problem, the review literature. Review literature is so elaborate, So that does not go together. So please remember that while you frame your statement of the problem, you are the dependable, the literature availability is very limited in qualitative research. So therefore, you can, throughout maintain a certain element of openness, like put up in the form of questions, rather than statements. Statement of the problem may be put up more in the form of questions rather than statements. That's what all that I wanted to communicate. At the first initial stage, this is something that maybe initial researchers forget, because you are used to writing the statement of the problem in the form of statements, because that is what generally you come across. Whereas in qualitative research, the first step itself, like you need to make it little open, little, say indefinite in character, like by putting up statements in the form of questions rather than in the form of statements. So that is the major aspect which you need to keep in mind with regard to the statement of the problem. Then again, while writing the significance of the study, which is normally considered the second step in any problem formulation, the significance of the study need to be seen as something which is, generally we talk about quantitative, researchers. Significance is attributed to either in terms of the academic significance or in terms of the social significance. So this is one aspect which you may find different in qualitative research, because this may be academically an underexplored topic, number one. So you may not be able to locate, but where exactly this your study will fit into, that is one problem which you might face. And similarly, the social significance is again something which you may not be able to deal with so easily, and casually, for the reason that, like you are perhaps going to deal with a problem which is very much individual specific, not necessarily a socially oriented problem. You're going to deal with some the experiential dimensions of a person in terms of his own subjective, problems rather than the objective problems. So again, I think you need to maintain the same openness which I'm talking about, which I talked about with regard to the statement of the problem. When you write the significance of the study, also you need to put it up a little more open than in the quantitative research. That is one strategy which I think we can follow, because everything is in a very initial phase and nothing is very definitionally say organized and things like that. So you can only afford to be flexible and open, and and putting up in the form of questions and a kind of expectation futuristically, rather than definitionally. That is one thing that we need to remember. Now, qualitative reviews, actually, it progresses on review. While coming to the review literature, it progresses along, generally on a subjective, theme-based reviews. That is what normally happens in qualitative research. Literature reviews, theme-based. Nothing more. You don't have, exact topics and, specific objectives and things like that. So obviously, you may, move around certain themes which strike you, like in the process. You may come across, some themes like, I will give you some examples at the end of my presentation so that, you'll be able to connect it. For example, one example which I often refer to my students in the classroom, lectures, is that of a topic called, one of the, researchers at Loyola long ago carried out a research on, a couple of cases of people who are infected with HIV. And the title of the topic, given by, of that research was Living Positively with HIV. Living Positively with HIV. That HIV, whenever we say, for instance, COVID positive and HIV positive, like we call it, we use those terminologies to refer to those people who are, detected with HIV or COVID. So, in this case, this particular researcher, carried out, her research on the experiences of a couple of HIV infected patients, in terms of how did, those people face, how did they cope up with, the experience of living positive, infected with HIV. This is the, say the topic that she explored in her research. And there, the literature review progressed along the theme of positive living positive. So I'm giving this example basically to, provide a kind of an idea and understanding on how the literature reviews in qualitative research might evolve and might proceed. So you may have certain themes like this, like in your research question, and you simply, try to, explore around those themes, and then, it evolves like that. Otherwise, you may not have anything very significant, to refer to and to depend on, for, in research, in qualitative research, because qualitative researches are generally exploratory in nature, and they are researches carried out on topics which are not studied, at length by anybody. And also you try to document and capture, research situations which are, totally subjective in nature, which, not easy for anybody to capture so easily, So these are the, dynamics which should be kept in mind while framing the literature review in a qualitative research. Now, then moving on to the, moving further, as I was mentioning earlier, you put up your research objectives generally in the form of research questions, open research questions, and then specific questions, and that can be really open in the sense that, okay, that will take you to different directions, which you cannot anticipate in the beginning. Only idea that you have at the moment is that, okay, this is an open question, and I need to go deep into it to understand where exactly and what exactly I should focus on, and what I should, try to bring in my research process and integrate that into my research. So these are questions which are totally totally unanticipated, and that that emerges in the process. So I always tell my students, research scholars, that qualitative research has a more of an evolutionary character, emergent character, rather than a kind of a framework-oriented research. The framework that we find in quantitative research, every step and stage is very clear. It progresses from one to the other. There is a kind of a linear kind of an evolution in quantitative research on a very specific line, but that does not happen in qualitative research. Such a linear evolution is practically impossible. You go through so many ups and downs. You have one question at one point of time, and you walk along a bit of distance, and then you realize that the question that you have at the moment is practically not going to help you, and it is not it doesn't have that much of value as far as the particular problem is concerned. So you are forced to change your question, rephrase it in such a way that, okay, you find a different question little more meaningful and relevant to the question, the situation. So this is what happens in qualitative research when it comes to actual research, actually doing it. So please keep this in mind, while framing your questions, at the early stage. Don't fix it. Don't think that, okay, this is going to be the question that I'm going to, carry out my research only, based on. And this question itself will change, it will evolve, it will emerge, because of the insights which you might get from the field, which you cannot find from anywhere else. And it is perhaps, your respondents would lead you. They will take you, to, some other levels of the problem, which you never anticipated in the beginning. And that is where, we said that, okay, you have to see things from the eyes of the people concerned, rather than, from your own eyes. When you look at things from your own eyes, it becomes more of, the quantitative frame, quantitative paradigm, where you are, being very objective, objective kind of understanding. That is not what is needed in a qualitative research space. So this is again another, insight that I think every qualitative researcher should keep in mind, that, questions are, simply questions, and, they are just, a kind of a torchlight kind of a situation. Wherever the light falls, you see something. That is a kind of the process that happens in qualitative research. So it will keep changing. It will keep evolving. It will keep evolving into. Finally, maybe if you are lucky enough, you will catch hold of that very specific, most relevant kind of a question, in between, and that then you will get an answer also to that, without much further delay. So shaping up your route, the route of progression, route of, actual process of research, that itself takes a lot of time. And, I'm sure that, when I was mentioning in the early stage of my lecture today, that, most students, when they are asked to make a problem formulation for qualitative research, they're happy because they know that they can simply make some statements and, get rid of, just like that. Whereas in quantitative research, you have to clearly mention variables, hypotheses, everything very systematically. So in the qualitative case, it's the other way, you can simply say, okay, these are things which are not known so far, kind of a statement is enough. But when you move ahead in doing qualitative research, please be informed that this is going to be the worst kind of research that you will, you will come across, this is going to be very difficult, that difficult in the sense that, okay, every later stages in qualitative research becomes much complicated and difficult than the quantitative research. Quantitative research progresses on a path, like it is, as I said, quite linear in character. Whereas in qualitative research, you make one step ahead, and the next thing will be 2 steps backward. That is the kind of iterative character, of the qualitative research. It is going back and forth, kind of situations. You cannot move on a straight line, like you will be interrupted, you will be, stopped by so much of, intervening revelations, which would demand that, okay, you need to rephrase, reframe, and things like that. So that is why, the qualitative problem formulation, need to anticipate it. And that anticipation will reflect in your formulated problem itself. You are not making anything definitionally, but keeping things in the quite open, so that, okay, it progresses along the line that it demands, it needs. It requires. That's the kind of strategy that I think we can maintain. Now, again, when you move further to I will just give a few examples, of the formulation. I was mentioning earlier that one topic, which I was partially connected to. A student researcher here was doing research on living positively with HIV. I will just describe how. Okay, before I move on to that example, one more aspect about choosing the correct method and design. Choosing the correct method and design. We all know that, okay, after the research questions, you need to really think about what the procedure for your study. What is the procedure? What kind of strategy and method that you're going to use? In qualitative research, identifying the design itself is, more complicated than quantitative research. Quantitative research, I think, is a little more straightforward, compared to qualitative research. Whereas qualitative research is not that straightforward. A very different kind of questions, situations might demand a very careful selection of an appropriate method, a strategy, a design, and so on. So identifying the design demands a lot of care in the sense that, you need to be very, very much involved in that process. Generally in quantitative research, whenever even the lay people will say, okay, go and carry out a survey research. This is how people react, when there is anything to be studied. Quantitative research and survey research, everything is so, naturally connected, so there is a feeling like that. Whereas in qualitative research, you cannot be that careless in you selecting your design. You need to identify the design and method typically based on the, the uniqueness of the problem under study. You need to know whether a case study is, suitable, or is it going to be an ethnographic study which is needed. So you need to, or phenomenological design that you needed. You need to differentiate all. This is a very narrow, line of difference. And it's narrow at the same time very technical. Narrow at the same time is very important as far as the selection is concerned. So this is, I think, one stage where most initial researchers make a lot of mistakes. That is why, at one stage you select case study as your design, and then you realize that, okay, my problem, demands a different approach, kind of, realizations happen. Researchers generally think that, okay, this is a huge mistake. But I am one of those, persons who believe that it's not at all a mistake. This is how it evolves. You cannot be sure about everything in the beginning of the qualitative research. That is the beauty as well as this, challenge of doing qualitative research. As I said, it has a processual, evolutionary character, not a linear evolution at all. It has a lot of going back and forth. So therefore, choosing the design is a very, 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 tactical step, which I think would require you to, first of all, read very deep reading about the designs and its characteristics. Where exactly that you fit in case study or ethnography and phenomenology and so on. These are the margins are very narrow. So obviously, you need to be very technical in that orientation, and that I always recommend my students to whoever is doing research, I suggest them very strongly to read as many books as possible on research methodology, rather than sticking on to one just small book, which normally that is the practice, so while doing research, it is not that, okay, you're doing research on the topic alone. You also need to read on the research methodology so that you get to know the nuances of different strategies, nuances of different methods, different designs and so on, so that, you fit in most perfectly, the most appropriate one. And that would really save you a lot of headache, that is actually, something which is very important as far as any researcher is concerned. I would say, especially for qualitative researcher. Because the quantitative research, the data magic is there. The magic of data speaks. And then therefore people are quite happy with whatever data you generate. Whereas in qualitative research, it demands a different kind of a logic, which provides you with the value, additional credentials for your research. So this logical adaptation of the design and the method is very important, and I would recommend the initial researchers to read into the different designs and then relate it with your problem, compare it with your problem, which design is more appropriate for your problem. This is how I think this problem can be solved, and there are no shortcuts. Please remember that. Many a times, the research scholars have the tendency that, okay, the guide will tell you, the research supervisor will tell you exactly, which design is more suitable. That is again a kind of a false expectation, because, guide may be familiar with the research, supervisors may be familiar with the, the research designs and so on, but they may not know the problem at hand to the extent that you know about. Because you are the one who selected that topic. It's out of your curiosity, out of your understanding that you select a topic. So that topic, while you understand you select something as your problem. That problem, some idea, some understanding of the problem is also needed to finalize your design. So that is why I was saying that, okay, changing the designs or changing the strategies, from one to the other, need not necessarily be a damage. It may be one of the required steps, which you may have to go through while doing qualitative research. So be open. That's what I'm saying. Be flexible. Don't stick on to doing something in the most priorly fixed line. That is not research. If you want to be a qualitative researcher, that kind of a fixed line, linear kind of a travel is not possible, because this is where the qualitative, subjective, relative dimensions make a lot of impact. If you could anticipate everything in advance, then you could design everything in advance. But here you cannot anticipate much. Everything keep changing, everything keep emerging while you are in the field or while you move ahead with your procedure. So all these demand that you maintain a kind of a strategy which is slightly different from that of the the general quantitative research procedure. Now, so the design and method has to be more iterative in nature. Iterative means you have to keep it open and anticipate that, okay, changes will happen in between. And those changes are not for the, not for the worse. It is going to be for the good. You need to remember and understand that. So don't be so rigid in your approach and procedure. You need to keep it open so that, okay, you can adapt to the changes that is needed. And without, adapting such changes, like the research may go wrong. It may go in wrong directions, So please remember that, the strategies of, problem formulation also involves identifying the procedure, possible strategies for data collection and so on. So please remember that, that again can vary. In fact, there are many, higher number, more strategy is possible in qualitative research. For example, sometimes you will be using, biographical approach. You may be using life histories. You may be using FGDs or observation, as it is in the case of, ethnographic studies, narratives, or different kind of data collection methods, or strategies and tools may be required to be used. So there again, depends on, the ultimate selection depends on, the actual nature and character of the problem, and the actual character and nature of the understanding of the problem, your level of understanding, all these matters, so generally, it is like, I often repeat one, sentence which I found very interesting in one of the qualitative, books, one of the books on qualitative research, where the author says that, I'm just recollecting it, research is something like, something that you make mistakes in the beginning, so that, it ends up as something beautiful. That this is kind of, I'm not exactly able to recollect the sentence, but this is the idea. Research, qualitative research needs to be understood as something, which you will make so many mistakes at the beginning, but the end of that would become like more meaningful and, beautiful. That is the logic that the author says. So the particular author has dedicated the book to her students who made such mistakes, so that, she could learn from those mistakes and then consolidate those ideas into a beautiful book on qualitative research. So this is how I think, a perspective can help you while, being a qualitative researcher. And a couple of, small aspects, before I wind up, I just take up the example of, two examples of, topics, like where for us to, have a little more clarity with regard to how you go about. I've identified two topics here. One is, of course, I mentioned already, living positively with HIV, and secondly, experiences of women re-entering college after marriage and pregnancy. One is living positively with HIV. Another one is experiences of women re-entering college after marriage and pregnancy. Now, you look at both the topics. Both the topics are, reflective of an experiential dimension. Both the topics have a focus on the subjective experiences of the, the problem. It's not something that you can anticipate from the outside and talk about in detail. It's going to be, for example, living positively with HIV means, like every HIV positive patients may have, their own unique experiences and ways of dealing with it, which you cannot generalize, just like that. You can generalize from an objective point of view, saying that, okay, they're all stigmatized and living under stigmatized situations and so on, but that need not necessarily be the, the case with people who fight it. Who fights, like, for example, just think about people who are cancer affected. You have seen many people, many celebrities and so on, coming forward saying that, okay, cancer is nothing, you can fight it. Kerala can, and all that we have seen, like in media and so on. So obviously the, the attitude, the way people deal with, such situations vary from person to person. And therefore you need to focus on the subjectivity of the person concerned in the way that he or she deals with. And that subjectivity is something which you cannot capture in advance. You cannot frame it in the form of an objective. Not, these are the situations which you should anticipate while going ahead with a qualitative research on a topic, because it is very subject specific. It is experientially, focused, and experience is experience. Unless you experience, you don't realize what it is. So that is where, the orientation demands a kind of a shift. And second case is also experience of women re-entering college after marriage and pregnancy. It varies from person to person, although you can talk about some general things, with regard to the experience, the aspect really matters. Aspect really vary. So this is something, but something you need to keep in mind. There is a kind of subjective relative condition that you are exploring, which you should always keep in mind. There is no question of, generalizing those findings. It is for the sake of capturing the experience of one person or two persons, that is all. And it is not otherwise. In the last case also, you are dealing with personal experiences of the women, who are re-entering. And it can vary from so many angles, like the kind of support she gets, the kind of, the time availability, family structure, all kinds of things can be there, which can be properly captured only from the point of view of the person concerned rather than objectively from outside. That is where, the topic demands to be studied from a totally different strategy. And the designs, everything depends, how you place that experience in the with regard to the available designs in qualitative research. And and obviously you may be using observation as an approach, strategy, or maybe biographies you may be looking at, narratives you may be looking at. These are different options, which depends on, the final selection depends on your, the way that you connect the strategy with your problem. That is the ultimate answer to this. Otherwise, no final answer, no one-word answer to such issues, which always, qualitative researcher needs to remember that.